In 2021, I quit my job with no backup plan and started working for myself. I started by doing a lot of gig work while trying to get into freelancing, but I struggled for quite a while before I actually was making any type of significant income doing freelance work. So today I wanted to show you guys what my first full year of freelancing looked like in terms of how much money I made and also what my expenses are. So I'm not gonna just show you the revenue, I'm also gonna tell you my business expenses to give you my actual profit at the end of the day, because when you work for yourself, you also have new expenses that you do not have when you work a typical corporate or 9-to-5 job. So if you're interested in that, stick around and we will just jump right into it. But one more thing before we get started, if you are curious what it looked like when I was straight out of quitting my job doing gig work as well as trying to start freelancing, then I did make a video specifically about how much money I made during that period, and I will have that linked down in the description box for you guys to watch after this video. So the way we're gonna structure this video is I'm gonna go through each month and tell you how much money I made in that month, what exactly contributed to that amount of money, because each month is very different. Like you'll see, in some months I make quite a bit of money, and some months I make quite a little amount of money. And then I'm gonna go over briefly my business expenses for the month to give you that total profit. And then we will end with the complete total for the year. So starting with January, in January of 2023, I made $7,200.01 from freelance work. $4,128.75 of this amount was specifically from one client who I was doing a lot of work for. I will specify if any of these clients were specifically hourly versus project work, but during this time frame, one of my clients was going through a huge transition. She had lost a key employee in her business, so I was really helping to kind of fill in for that as well as looking for a replacement for her. And then you'll see over time, as I help train that person and get them integrated, my time there gets less and less. So at this time, it was really important for me to make sure I was still keeping up with my other client work, because although I was seeing a huge surge in amounts of money that I was getting from this one specific client, I knew that this was temporary and that I could not rely on this in the long run. So although this is always important, specifically right then, I knew that it would be really easy to just be like, let me just grind out as many hours as I can for this client, because I was really doing the most that I could do with my time, and there was still work I could do. So I could have continued, which I did in a lot of capacities, work over 40 hours a week to be able to do as many hours as possible for this client while they had the need to, number one, help the client, but also make more money. So that client as well was paying me at $45 an hour. So that is another thing I want to share with you guys too. And that specific payment was for the previous month. So that was for work done in December. So that's another thing, is that some of these amounts are for previous work done. Some of them are for future work that I'm going to do. And then some of them are more on a weekly basis that is still like previous work, but not like a whole month previous. Then I made about $1,000 from another one of my clients that I do coding work for. And at this point I was getting paid $40 an hour to do that work. That is a client I've had consistently for quite a while now. And I consider it like my stability client, because I currently don't see them going anywhere and there's always something I can do. I do about 1 day a week of work for them. So basically I just knock out 1 day of my work week, get stuff done for this client, and then I make $1,000 by the end of the month at a bare minimum. If you think about those hours in that time frame, I was not really working the full 1 day a week, because again, I was putting a lot of time into that other client. Then we have client number 3 for the week. So this one's an interesting one. I got paid $1,000 for this client, and I was actually getting paid $125 an hour to do work and consulting for this client. So this was a client, again, it was temporary. I knew it wasn't gonna last a while, and they were really just having me work on a little bit of things here and there. So I was getting paid quite a lot of money, but I knew again, it was gonna be temporary. So I had previously done project work for this client, so I built a relationship with them and we agreed on a very high hourly rate for me to do some very high level work for them. So I got $1,000 for that, which was awesome. Then I received about $550 from client number 4, and then another $500 from client number 5. So in total, I worked with 5 clients this month to equate to that amount of money, which I think is pretty good. In terms of expenses for January, I spent $200 $215 on contractors and another $10.64 on general business expenses. So specifically, this was for, which you'll see this charge every single month, it is for my virtual mailbox and virtual address. So this is where I receive mail for my business, and it's the address that I incorporated my business under because I don't want my real address out there in the world. So my total profit for the month of January was $6,980-ish. We are going to be covering taxes, but I pay my taxes quarterly, so that will come out in that specific month's expenses. So stay tuned because yes, that is all pre-tax income. So January was a great month, but February was a little bit less. So in February, I made $5,608.45. Now again, that client that I was doing a lot of work for at $45 an hour, I made $3,926.25 for them. So my hours were a little bit less than they were the previous month. So I made a little bit less money. Then I made about $980 for the client that I do coding work for, again at $40 an hour. I made about $625 for client number 3. And at this time for this client, I was actually only making $20 an hour. I ended up raising my rates with them later, but at this time, that was all I was getting paid hourly for this work. And then for client number 4, I made $75. I was doing a few coaching calls for them, and it was also a friend's family member of mine. So I was offering it at a very low rate to help them out. And then in February, I also got paid from YouTube AdSense. I didn't get paid anything in January. I got no payout, so that is why I did not include it there. But since my business expenses also include YouTube editing, I am going to include this as income as well. So I made $177.38 from YouTube. And then I also made $80.52 from sponsorships. So that leaves me with a total of $5,866.35 for the month of February. And for my spending, I spent $359.24 on contractors, $175 on general purchases, which was some office supplies, my usual monthly payment for my virtual address, a font that I purchased for a client project I was working on, and then a big $120 purchase that was a reimbursable. I went and purchased something for a client and then they reimbursed me for it. And that leaves us with about $5,300 in profit for the month of February. March. Okay, so we were already moving down from January to February. March, we moved down even more. My freelance work income for March was $3,789.38. And the breakdown for that starts with the $1,867.50 I made from, again, that one hourly client that I was doing a lot of work for the past few months, but you can see now that work has cut basically in half because I had hired someone at this point and I was helping train and onboard them. So it was a lot less time because I wasn't doing the work myself. Then I made $970 from my coding client, $201.88 from my hourly $20 an hour client, and $450 from a new client of mine that I was working with that was also paying me $20 an hour. Oh, and apparently I can't do math. The first client that I talked about, my coding client, I was actually making another $300, so about $1,200 for the month of March. I made no sponsorship money in March, but I did make $224.56 from YouTube AdSense. So really the takeaway in terms of income for the month of March was that, again, that client I talked about in January that I needed to be very careful that I didn't accidentally only prioritize their work. I had unfortunately prioritized a lot of their work. And so when that work slowed down a lot, I did not have client work built up to be able to make as much money as I had been in the month of March. So what I would suggest and what I would have done differently that I continue to try to do to this day is to plan ahead. So if you know that you have a current project you're working on or a current client that needs a lot of support, but you also know that's going to dwindle down at some point, prepare ahead and try to line up a client to fill in for that time when that project or that client work is going to end. Sometimes it's hard to be able to actually figure this out. Like in this instance, because I was just waiting to get someone hired, it was kind of up in the air about how long that was going to take. And I also didn't know how much effort it was going to take to train and onboard this new employee that I was helping them hire. And I also had the fear of it not working out and then me having to jump back in and do the work again. And I didn't want to be overworking myself, which you will see that might be some foreshadowing for the future. So spending for March, I had $706.26 in contractor spending. So I had upped how much I was spending on contractors to support me with my work. I spent $178 on TurboTax. So I did file my taxes this month and I did get a refund, but that includes me and Oliver. So I'm not going to include that in any type of income here, even though I know that a good chunk of my refund was actually from me overpaying taxes the previous year. But again, that's like last year, not including it. Then I had my general expenses. So again, my $10 for my virtual mailbox, and then I had about $40 in office supplies. And then I started paying for thematic to get better music for my YouTube videos, which was about $8 a month. So that equaled a total spending of $942.91, which left me with a profit for March of $3,071.03, which is not good, not good at all. And when I say not good, I don't mean it's necessarily bad. It's a really great amount of money compared to what I was making previously before freelancing when I was doing more gig work. But it is not a lot of money when it comes to how much our expenses have become since we have gotten more settled and I have been making more money. So we've added on a lot more expenses and our monthly amount we need to make is higher than it used to be. So April was a great month. So I bounced back very well from the month of March where I made less money because I was again compensating and not scheduling well with the client that a lot of my work was going into previously. So in April, I had a freelance income of $7,079.70, which was absolutely great. $2,193.75 came from, again, the hourly client that I'd been with. So at this point, again, I was still training and onboarding and my hours stayed lower. For my coding client, I got paid $1,500 this month because I had been behind on some stuff because I had been putting so much time into that other client. So I really ramped it up in the month of April to kind of catch up and help them get some projects done and out. Then I made $905.95 from my $20 an hour client. But part of this, actually, half of this income probably was after I had raised my rates. So in this month of April, I doubled my rates with this client from $20 to $40 an hour. And the way that I did that the way we agreed to that was because I actually helped her hire an assistant. When I first started with her, I was really doing a lot of assistant tasks for her. And at this point, I helped her hire someone who actually had a background in the area that her work is in. And then I moved into more of an operations type of position in terms of the tasks I was supporting with. So this was a really great transition for me. It cut down the amount of time I had to spend on it and also meant that all of my work was now remote because I was actually doing some in-person work for her, running errands and things like that. So it really helped me out in terms of my time, but then I also got to double my rates because of this. So this was a great month in terms of my income because of that. So I made $905.95 from her at now $20 to $40 an hour. I made $600 from another client of mine that is at $20 an hour. And then I started working with a new client that was on a project basis. So the total project was going to be $1,000 and she paid the first half up front. So I got $500 from that in the month of April. And then I made another $380 for some work I did for another new client at $40 an hour. Oh, and then one more, I actually got paid another $900 for also another project that I was starting. And that was the first installment for an $1,800 contract that we were doing for a website rebuild. So that was really exciting. And man, I keep missing clients. I got 2 more payments in this month, one for $75 for a blog that I wrote for a client, and then one for $25 for that family member friend that I was doing some coaching for. So she paid me 25 bucks. And then for YouTube, I actually made $401.06 this month, which was awesome. So I totaled a income of $7,480.90 in the month of April. And expenses. So yes, I did make a lot of money, but I also had a lot of expenses in April. So I had number one, general expenses of $1,172.24. And majority of this money was for the camera that you were watching this video from right now. So I spent $725 on my new camera. I also bought a new tripod. I set up my deep workspace in my closet. I got some new light bulbs. I got power strips, and I think that's pretty much everything. And then I had my virtual mailbox, but a lot of new equipment for YouTube is really what that money went towards. And then I spent $446.18 on contractors, so a little bit more than normal. And you'll see that start to increase even more because I had more project-based work that was for websites, which is something that Alice helps me with. So I was utilizing more of her time and we were working together a lot more as these website projects kind of built up during these next few months. And then I had my $8 on software for thematic music. And then I spent about $7 on Starbucks for a client meeting that I went to. Now we are at the month of May, which I made $4,380.13 from freelance income. And the breakdown for that was that hourly client, I made $1,012.50. So I had even decreased those hours more now, which again led to a decent decrease in how much money I got paid. Then I made $1,480 from coding. So again, I was putting in a good amount of work into that. I made $750 as the first installment of my third project that I signed on to, which was a $1,500 contract. So we got that first payment brought in for that. I made $640.63 for the client that I had moved up to $40 an hour. You know, I really should have named these clients like A, B, C, D, E, F, G type of thing. That probably would have helped, but it really doesn't matter who's who at the end of the day because it all fluctuated throughout the year and I probably worked with 20 different clients throughout the year that I made all of this money. And then lastly, I got my last installment for one of the projects that I had started in the month of April. So I got another $500 from that. And then in May for YouTube, I had my highest income month from YouTube ever. I made $462.15 from YouTube AdSense. So that brought me to a total of $4,842.28. So our expenses for the month of May totaled $836.96 and $538.92 of that was for contractors. So again, that amount is going up because I've had more projects. And then I spent $195 on general expenses. Again, this was my monthly mailbox, but also a big bulk of this was actually getting my insurance license, which I was really doing to kind of help out a mentor of mine, but I had some expenses that I had to pay for that. So you will see after this that I have kind of monthly expenses going on for this. I never actually did anything with my insurance license. I basically hung it under my mentor and paid some insurance on it, and she helped reimburse me for some of that as well. So she was kind of like my sponsor in that sense to get my license. So I have my license, not using it, but who knows, maybe one day I will. And then I spent $103 on software. This left us with a net profit of $4,005.32. So not the best, not the worst, but it is what it is. And you'll see from really here on out, there's kind of a trend with the amount of money I'm making, which will make some more sense why things didn't ramp back up whenever I link it to July. So June, we made $4,402.50 from freelance work and $242.23 from YouTube. So in there, we have a lot of our usuals. I made $2,300 actually from that client that, again, I talked about from the beginning. I was doing a lot of hourly work for. That is because the person that we hired did not work out and I kind of jumped back into support. So that made the month of June actually really crazy. I was also doing 75 hard in May and June. So not only did I really feel like I had less time to work, I was just really overworking myself a lot and very, 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 very stressed. I did less coding work this month. I made about $1,000 from coding. I made about $600-ish from the client. I moved from $20 to $40 an hour. So at this point they were at 40. I made $225 from blog work, which was awesome. And that was about it. I did some rounding there, so I probably rounded down with a lot of those numbers, but point is, those were all the clients I worked with. I only worked with a few clients in this month. And for YouTube, like I said, I made $242. So I ended up only making about $4,643-ish in the month of June. And my expenses in June were $1,107.77. So $687 went to contractors. So again, we were finishing up a lot of those website projects that I had been working on. $400 in general expenses. So the majority of this was I got a new desk, and so I expensed that. It was $372 for like my desk and a few like accessories. And then I had my software expenses of, again, Thematic for $8. So that means for June, we only made $3,536.96 in profit. So this was like one of my lower months and it did not get better from here. So at the end of June, what happened was I had an ovarian cyst rupture. And so July and August, I was really struggling to get back to work. I really couldn't walk normally for about 4 weeks after the cyst rupture because it ruptured once and then 2 weeks later it ruptured again. So I just could not heal. By the time I could finally walk again and was more normal, I was really trying to get back into work, but a lot of my clients clients had given me a really good break because they knew I was recovering, and I gladly accepted the break because I needed it. But yeah, that means I really didn't make a lot of money. So in July, my freelance work equated to $3,931.25, which actually is not terrible in considering I wasn't working as much. But the reason it was still decently high is because my biggest chunk of that amount was $2,500 again from that client that I keep talking about, that's hourly, and that is always for the previous month. So she pays me the beginning of the month for the previous month. So I had invoiced her early July and got that big payment in, which was great and really helped me out in terms of covering our July expenses. So that is actually one thing I really like about the way I structure things. And although it really, at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily matter, but when you're at like a low amount of cash flow and you don't have a ton of wiggle room, like you're spending a lot of what you're making, it is really nice to have clients on different pay schedules. So I have some clients on weekly, some on bi-weekly, some on monthly, some on prepay, some on retainer. All of that really helps me out to get kind of an influx of cash at varying times of the month. Now, if you're really ahead and you're not like paycheck to paycheck, as they call it, this isn't gonna matter, because if you, and we did at this time have about 10K in buffer money, but I would rather have like a much larger buffer, especially because I pay contractors. So for me, it's really nice to get varying amounts at different times, especially when things like this happen. I still got this influx of cash. It didn't come in till July 12th. And I had been 2 weeks post the first rupture at this point. So that was super helpful for me to kind of have that extra money coming in for previous work I had done. Besides that, I got another $900 for the second installment on a project that we had just finished. So that was great. And again, another reason why I kind of like the half up front, half at the end model for project work that's at a set price. And then I only made $500 from coding this month because I barely did any work. I was really just doing bare minimum whenever they needed help for like emergency support. So I really barely did anything in the month of July, which is why I really barely made any money. But for YouTube, I still made $236.07, and I got another $80 from sponsorships. And sponsorships come in after you do the sponsorship. So most of the money I made in July was for previous work I had done. So that leaves us at a total income of $4,247.84 in July. And our spending in July was $693.50, which majority of that was for contractors, $512.54. Then we had our usual general expenses and software expenses. That left us with a profit of $3,554.34, which I will gladly take on a month that I barely did any work. That's honestly amazing. But again, it's all because of my pay structures and how and when certain people pay me. August, we had a freelance income of $3,847.50. So I started to get back into work. I got the second half of one of my project payments for $500. I only made $922 from that hourly client because in July, which again, this payment in August was from July's work, I again barely did any work. I did the bare minimum to help her get by, but she was letting me take a really good break because I was obviously not well and recovering. I did jump back into coding very well and made $1,420 in the month of August, so that was awesome. I got $75 for another blog post that I wrote in this month. And then I made about $930 from my $20 to $40 an hour client that I was working with. And that was everything for that month. I also made $192.22 from YouTube AdSense, which was awesome. That leaves us at a final income of $4,039.72 for August. And our expenses were only $338.24. So again, most of that was contractor expenses, $305.66. And then I had canceled and dumped all of my insurance stuff at this point, so I had no more expenses from that. So I really just had my virtual mailbox expense and my thematic expense, which gives us a final profit of $3701.48 for the month of August. Now we will move into September. So September, I made $4,205. I cannot talk, in freelance income. We made $810 from that same client that I had hired for. So at this point, I'd actually hired for her again. And I was kind of out of the hourly spiel for that and doing a lot of the actual work that had to get done, which was great. I made about $1,500 for for one of the clients I had done a project for previously for a website, but I was also helping her with some operations backend, and she is paying me $60 an hour. So I got about $1,500 from that. I made about $750 from my $20 to $40 an hour client, and I made about $1,200 from my coding client at $40 an hour. And then in the month of September, I made a little $118.24 from YouTube. So that left us with a total income of $4,323.24. And our spending in September was $1,032.83. So I spent $862 on contractor work. So there was more project work, and these payments also are for the previous month. So when I pay a contractor, I pay them at the beginning of the month after the work is done. So there was a lot of work done in August, which caused a higher amount paid in September. And then again, I had my usual charges, and I guess I was confused. I thought I'd canceled the insurance stuff by this point, but I had not. I got another charge in September, and then my usual other pieces of software and things like that. This left us with a total profit of $3,290.41. October, for freelance money, I made $4,338. And for YouTube, I made $150.88. I did start another new project with one of my clients, so I got a first payment of $800 for that project, as well as a lot of coding work that I did. I made $2,123.32 from coding, so I did a ton more coding in the month of October. In the month of October, I got only $225 from, again, that client I've been talking about every single month. So big shift at this point. January, I made $4,000 from that client. October, I made $225 from that client. So this is exactly why I think it's super important that you really diversify and remember that clients aren't necessarily going to be with you forever, versus compared to my coding client who I have been with for a very long time, I can basically make at least $1,000 each month from that client if I have time to put in the hours. So it really shifts, and who knows, that client could disappear at some point too. So every client is different, and you should never rely on one specific client to provide all of your income. And then I made about $1,200 from my $20 to $40 an hour client, and that accounted for all my money in the month of November, for the month of October. So the total for freelance and YouTube was $4,489.20. And the expenses in October were higher than normal. I had $1,489.65, which almost $1,000 of that was for contractor spending. I purchased my Whoop, which I am using for some challenge type videos. I'm going to use the data to track like doing 75 hard, things like that. So I did expense that. And then I had a few client meetings in person, so I did expense a few coffee shop purchases. And then for software, I decided to start using Canva monthly, so that's $15 a month. And then I also paid for an annual subscription to Epidemic Sounds, which is $120 for the year. And then I also paid for my YNAB subscription, which I use for these types of videos as well, to track all of my expenses for my business. And that was $99 for the year. So that left us with a profit, I think this is our lowest yet, of $2,999.55. So almost at $3,000, but actually below. So November was a very low month for me. I only made $3,385 from freelancing. $800 of that was from a new client that I was working with, and I was doing weekly consulting calls with them at $200 per call to help them set up the launch of their new course. I made $405 from that same hourly client. That has decreased in time over the year. I got $150 to do a few hours of work for a client that I had done a previous website project for. I made $560 from the $20 to $40 an hour client. And then I did a decent normal chunk of coding work for $1,470. And then for YouTube, I made $201.11. So that left us with a total income of $3,586.11. And then my expenses were $519.76, so not too bad, which was $430 for contract work, and then about $85 for some office supplies. I got a filing box, I got a monitor mount, and then my usual Canva subscription and my mailbox, virtual mailbox, which left us with a profit of $3,066.35 for the month of November. Now let's get into our last month of the year, which is December. Now December, things started to pick up a little bit more for the first first time really since my whole cyst rupture incident. I made $5,162.11 from freelance work. And this was for quite a few different things. I got paid $1,650 for one of my clients that I was doing hourly work for at $60 an hour. I got the final payment for a project that I had completed for $387.50. I made $202.50 from that same client I've been talking about each month that has decreased in time. I made $400 from a new consulting client that I took on that I was doing a package deal for, where I was offering weekly calls to help them set up their course at $200 per session. I made about $1,100 from my $20 to $40 an hour client, and then $1,100 from coding. And then I also had a client that I was doing hourly work for that I have been working with for a while, and at this point was charging her $30 an hour, and I got paid $276.48 to do a little bit of work for her. And then for YouTube, I made $219.50 in December, which left us with a total income of $5,381.61. And in December, I had spending expenses of $723.85. 528 of that was from contractors, 140 of that was from food, and that is because Alice came into town and I expensed all the meals that we had together. So, woo, thanks for coming, Alice. You helped my tax bill be lower. I bought some office supplies and had my usual monthly expenses for my mailbox as well as Canva. And at this point, I did cancel all of the insurance stuff, so none of that was an expense anymore. And this left us with a total profit of $4,657.76. Now we get to talk about totals for the entire year of 2023, my first full year doing freelancing full time, and keeping in mind that I had basically a whole month that I basically took off. I made $57,329.35 from freelancing, $161 from sponsorships, and $2,625.40 from YouTube AdSense. And that left me with a total income of $60,115.79. But my total business expenses for 2023 were $10,087.43, which left us with a profit of $50,028.36, which in my opinion is not half bad considering, again, this was my first full year doing it and I had taken off a decent chunk of time. And I was also not working full time on a consistent basis. A lot of weeks I definitely worked less than 40 hours a week to get all of this done and make this amount of money. And I have the flexibility that I've had, so that is amazing. But the very important thing about all this is that that is all pre-tax money. So not only is that what you would want to compare to your current annual salary that you're making pre-tax from your job, when you work for yourself, you also have to pay self-employment tax. So you're paying more taxes than you would in a regular job. And in taxes in the year of 2023, I paid $10,775.31. So if we subtract that out, we're left with $39,253.05, which is really not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. But a few things that I want to mention here are, number one, that is not the actual amount of taxes I ended up paying. And that is because I actually expensed a lot of other items and had a lot more tax write-offs that very much lowered my expenses. So, and I don't know the exact amount I paid in taxes because I filed jointly with my husband, so it very much changes that whole thing and that whole dynamic. But I did get a tax refund of about $1,000 this year. So, I mean, if you wanted to just pretend that $1,000 was for me, then we could add $1,000 in and say that I basically made $40,000 for the year. So about $40,000 is the amount that I made for the entire year after expenses, after taxes. And again, I think that's pretty good considering how I feel about the amount of work that I put into 2023. This year, the beginning of the year has also been very slow for me because I have been, again, struggling with some health stuff. So I am trying to balance the work and health issues as well as just work-life balance. I have done a lot in terms of fun activities. I've very much spent a lot of time on my friend's wedding in the first few months of this year. I was the maid of honor, so I was helping with bachelorette prep, bridal shower prep, her wedding, which also was like a lot of traveling, a lot of time off that I took. So there's been a lot this year so far that has taken away from my work. And I've also accepted that I don't want to grind and just work 40 hours a week every single week, and that is okay. But something that I'm really aiming for is last year, my average monthly income from freelancing freelancing was about $4,800, give or take. And this year, that is also my goal, is to kind of stay around the $5,000 a month average range in terms of my bare minimum. Now, I have a lot of new things coming. I'm looking to launch my full-scale business soon instead of doing this hourly freelance type of thing. So that could drastically change things for me in a very short period of time. But something that I recently resonated a lot with that I want to end this video with is the concept of an employee mindset versus an owner's mindset. And I've heard this idea plenty of times, and it's something that's been really important to me for a while since quitting my job. But I heard it more recently in Vanessa Lau's video. If you're familiar with her, I've been following her for a long time. She was one of the inspirations for me to quit my job. And she recently started talking about how since she came back after quitting her business and really kind of starting from square one again this year, she has really struggled with the employee mindset when it comes to your income. So what that basically means is that you're so fixated on the month to month. It's kind of like the paycheck to paycheck concept. Whenever we're paid as an employee, we're just wanting our biweekly or our monthly paycheck. And it's like, we need this amount of money each month to pay all our bills because that amount of money does not change. So if you agree to getting paid $2,000 a month, that's all you're gonna make unless you ask for a raise. You're not gonna suddenly make more money. When you're working for yourself or trying to build a business, that monthly amount can vary, as you saw a lot in my last year's income. I had months where I made $7,000. I had months where I made $2,500. It varied quite drastically, and that change is something that's difficult to accept when you are used to the employee type of salary, but very important to accept because that will allow you to not get so extremely stressed out every time that you have a low income month and be able to realize that next month you could make triple what you made this month. You just have to plan ahead and think about what you're trying to do to make that amount of money so that you can actually succeed in that way. But I find that that leads you to get stuck in what I'm gonna now coin the freelancer mindset, which is where you're like, I can make a certain amount of money if I work a certain number of hours, because you are still trading time for money. And that is a trap that I have fallen into over the past year that has really led me to feel like I'm really an employee and kind of feel that stress of an employee instead of allowing myself to expand into the owner mindset of viewing my business as something that generates income for the business and then pays me a salary. So in that sense, if I'm able to kind of transition out of that, I can stop being so fixated on making $5,000 a month on average, although I still want that because I want that stability. Like what's the word? Like, I'm contradicting myself right now. I just gave this whole spiel of like, I want to make about $5,000 a month because that feels very stable and comfortable. But then afterwards I'm like, but I want to let go of that mindset. But it's just proof right there that even though I've been thinking about this and sitting on this for a while now, this concept and wanting to like let go of that monthly amount, I still, without even thinking, I didn't have that plan to say that in this video and it just came out. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to make about $5,000 a month. I'll feel good. I'll feel less stressed. But the reality is I could take off a whole month and then launch a business and in our first week of launch, make $20,000. Like, that is the type of expansion mindset that I want to have and be able to view it as unlimited, limitless in terms of what I can do, so that I'm not so focused on like, gotta work this amount of hours today, gotta work this amount of hours tomorrow, because that's just not gonna get me anywhere. So that is why I've been planning for and working on this business launch for the past few months since the beginning of the year, because I really, really, really want to prioritize getting that launch so I can really start to get back into that expansion mindset and hire people to help me. I've brought on my friend Cindy, which I've talked about. So my contractor expenses are going up each month because I do have someone else on board to help me, but that's also allowing me to work more on the business, do more of the actual like CEO operations type of things that are not billable hours. So that is something that has been a huge shift for me and extremely helpful, because the more time I can spend on actually growing and raising awareness around this business and launching the business, the more money I can make in the long run. So I really need to put my time where it's best utilized and focus on that before I can move into anything else. And I have a specific cycle that I haven't like coined it all yet that I'm going to talk about in the future. That's like my alignment cycle for my business that I also utilize to help a lot of my clients. And that's going to be a key part of my new business launch. So I will talk about that more in the future to kind of share that mindset with you guys and that structure, so that if you're also in the spot that I'm in where you're trying to transition from freelancer to business owner, you can use this framework to help you as well. But all in future videos. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the things, like the video, blah, 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 blah. And just comment down below and tell me the most surprising thing that you learned from this video, and maybe the biggest drastic change you've seen in your own income if you're also a freelancer or business owner. What has been your highest monthly amount that you've made, and then your lowest monthly amount? Because I find it super interesting to kind of see that big shift in that change. It just shows you how much you're capable of handling in terms of change, and just how flexible we are and how able we are to kind of roll with the punches. And also that's a really important part of budgeting. So anyways, I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in next week's video. Bye.